Welcome everybody to our celebration of oaks and acorns. And this is our very first attempt at a Zoom seminar, everyone. So thank you, Kate, and thank you, Sherrie, for being our speakers today. Kate Marianchild is the author of the award-winning bestseller, Secrets of the Oak Woodlands, Plants and Animals Among California's Oaks. Her book, which is currently in its 7th printing, is delightfully narrated and beautifully illustrated romp through California's most diverse and widespread ecosystem. Kate lives in a yurt near Ukiah in the middle of an oak woodland. When she's not giving talks, guiding walks, or observing nature, she swims, sings, and advocates for the preservation of oak woodlands. You can go to her website, katemarianchild.com, to buy her book, Close Focusing Binoculars, Oak Identification Charts, or learn about restoring insect populations. Kate's book and her oak identification chart are for sale in the Healdsburg Museum gift shop, and they're available now. And I will introduce Sherrie before Sherrie's part of the talk. So take it away, Kate. Thank you for this.
Hi. Well, this experience confirms the ancient adage that if something can go wrong with a Zoom talk, it will go wrong. Okay, is everyone muted?
Let's see.
I don't know if we're just asking people to mute themselves or if you can do it centrally. But I'll just go ahead. So my talk today is a celebration of oak woodlands, and I hope you're going to come away at least half as excited about them as I am. So for a little background, 20 years ago, I moved from the coast into a small yurt nestled among 6 different oak species, along with bay laurels, buckeyes, madrones, manzanitas, toyon, poison oak, and a host of other plants and a lot of wildlife. I soon fell in love with the sheer beauty and vitality of the oak woodlands that surrounded me. But I was isolated and lonely at first, and guess who kept me company? Oops, let me go back. Acorn woodpeckers, also known as red-headed woodpeckers. Lots of them were always flying around and squawking and pecking holes in trees and pounding acorns into those holes to store them for the winter, and they cheered me up. And they also seemed very connected with each other, not afraid of getting physically close with each other. And I didn't figure it out at the time, but I think they comforted me because they seemed like a family. And guess what? Years later, I found out that they were a family. These birds live in clans of up to 16 members, and they have the most complex family and social structure of any vertebrate species in the world, including humans. Not just any bird species, but any species with a backbone. And I won't go into all their wild and crazy dynamics and behaviors right now, but you can read a rollicking chapter about them in my book. And you can see I like them so much that one is on the cover. This is a painting by Anne McGlinty, who did all the illustrations in this book, and you'll see a bunch of them in this slideshow. So I liked acorn woodpeckers so much that I asked myself the question, what do they need from their ecosystem to survive long into the future? And I also wondered, what other world-class species are hiding out in these oak woodlands? And those questions led me into learning about oaks and insects and lizards and newts and wood rats and butterflies. And pretty soon I realized that oak woodlands are filled with fascinating world-class species. And then I also learned that they are home to more species abundance and more species diversity than any other type of terrestrial ecosystem in California. And I think even in the Western United States, that's what I've figured out recently. And that is largely because oaks themselves support more life forms than any other, not only tree, but any other plant in North America. Yep. So what makes them so special? Well, first of all, the genus Quercus, to which oaks belong, is more widespread than any other tree genus in North America or the entire world, for that matter. And trees in this genus and their cousins, the tan oaks, are marvels of evolutionary genius that allows them to grow to be very, very large and live very, very long lives. And that means that over millennia, insects, which are, after plants, are the foundation of animal food chains, have had more chances to encounter oaks than other trees. And so they've had the opportunity to evolve along with oaks. And in particular, they've had the opportunity to develop resistance to the chemicals with which oaks protect themselves against herbivores. So that means that an enormous number of insect species can eat the leaves, nuts, flowers, cambium, galls, and roots of oaks and live to tell the story. And I'll say more about that later. So each mature oak can produce plus or minus 3 million nutrient-rich acorns in the course of its life. And that's an East Coast figure. And I figure the number might be higher here because we have at least the tallest oaks in the world, are valley oaks. And the tallest one in the world is in Covelo. And we have oaks here that live to be 800 years old. There's one just north of Willits. And each of these mature oaks also produces an average of 700,000 leaves every year, and probably more here. But nuts and leaves aren't the whole story. What's going on beneath the trees? So the leaves that drop off of deciduous oaks in the fall and that drop off evergreen oaks all year round aren't just any old dead leaves. Those dead leaves create just about the best leaf litter known to soil. And there are two reasons for that. The first is that oaks hang on to their leaves much longer than most trees do, well into winter, if not all the way into spring. And that's a phenomenon known as marcescence. And the second is that they're thick and tough and they decompose slowly. And the result of that is that oak leaf litter is constantly present all year round, constantly decomposing and providing cover and hiding places and usually moisture, not necessarily here in September, but for countless organisms. And most of them are microscopic or really tiny, like springtails and mites. And there are 1 million nematodes in 1 square meter of leaf litter. But there are also larger organisms that are pretty well camouflaged, so we just don't even see them, like this litter moth caterpillar. So I just put it on the screen. Can you see it? Can you find it? Look at my arrow, it's right here. That's a litter moth caterpillar, and amazingly, it eats dead leaves. And apparently there are a couple dozen moth caterpillar species that eat only dead leaves. And then there's this wolf spider, and I just put that up here in the upper left of the screen. And this is greatly magnified. And I'm wondering if any of you have ever been out at night with a flashlight and you've shined the beam ahead of yourself and you've seen a tiny little gleam from in the leaf litter or in the low grass. If you follow the beam gleam, you can all the way to where it hits the ground and look closely. You very well might see a tiny little wolf spider. Another denizen of leaf litter is all of our California newts. which, I mean, the newts that live in California, and this particular one is the California newt. And they estivate in leaf litter during the dry season, trying not to dry out themselves. So I said that. So did you know that newts can regrow not only their limbs, but also their hearts, their livers, their spinal cords, the lenses of their eyes, parts of their brains, and parts of their lungs, well into old age. And so that's why I consider, for other reasons, I consider newts a world-class species, and you can learn more about them in my book, where there are some pretty amazing stories about them and their co-evolutionary arms races with garter snakes. So rich leaf litter soil is also a great place for planting acorns, which is what this scrub jay is doing. This jay is exquisitely adapted for a relationship with oaks. In fact, the ancestor of all jays started co-evolving with oaks about 60 million years ago in Southeast Asia, where coincidentally oaks were getting their first start in the world. So this jay has a tip, a hook at the end of its bill, and that's for ripping husks off of acorns. And she also has an expandable esophagus that allows her to store or carry 5 acorns at a time. So scrub jays each jay buries up to 5,000 acres every year to store them in the ground for later consumption. But for various reasons, they don't retrieve about 5% of the acorns they bury. And that's not because they forget where they are. They have fabulous memories. And many of those acorns end up germinating and hopefully surviving all their many challenges and growing into saplings and then maturing into oaks. So almost all the oaks we see carpeting California have been planted by jays, mostly this species, the California scrub jay. And right now they are planting acorns in soil that burned this year. They especially like to plant acorns in burned soil. But acorns and leaves and leaf litter aren't the whole story. Is there anything going on beneath the ground? And the answer is yes, and it's fundamental to the life and health of the oak. These California chanterelles, which are also known as oak chanterelles or mud puppies, are just one of dozens or hundreds of species known as mycorrhizal fungi that partner with oaks for a mutually beneficial relationship. They are coming up here in leaf litter, as you can see. And these are the visible parts, the above ground fruiting bodies of a vast underground network of tiny tubes called hyphae. And the hyphae altogether are collectively known as mycelium, and affectionately now known as the wood wide web. And these, the mycelium, these hyphae, these fungi provide essential nutrients to oaks. And in return, the oaks give them back a whopping 30% of the sugars that they manufacture through photosynthesis, because fungi can't make their own food. They all have to get it from somewhere else. So these mycorrhizal fungi perform lots of other services as well for the plants they partner with, which is about 95% of the plants on Earth. And one of their services is to carry nutrients from mature oaks or other trees to other plants in the ecosystem that need help. And a recent study shows that more nutrients end up going to their closest relatives than to other kinds of trees or plants, but they would support manzanitas or anything else that's around, even firs. So plant fungus partnerships are almost certainly the most widespread and important mutually beneficial symbiosis on Earth, and one on which almost all life depends. And I can't go into that more deeply right now. It's a huge subject, but you might enjoy my chapter on it, which starts with an asteroid, the asteroid that hit the Earth 65.5 million years ago. So let's go back to acorns. Are they part of the reason that oaks support more life forms than any other tree in North America? Well, take a minute and just see if you can think of any species. What species do you know of that eat acorns? And since I only have half an hour, I'm not going to wait very long for you to come up with your thoughts on that. But also I'll just say a few. One is insects like this weevil, and Sherrie, who's coming after me, will have a lot more to say about them. There are small rodents like deer mice and voles and chipmunks and wood rats that eat acorns. And I have it on good authority that this wood rat already has 22 pounds of acorns stored in her acorn pantry in her house. And she has plenty of manzanita and toyon berries in the berry pantry. And the mushroom pantry is pretty full. So now she's carrying her other favorite food, which is live oak leaves, into her house. They're kind of right up there with acorns as her favorite food. So she built her house out of sticks, and it's full of corridors and dedicated pantries and cozy waterproof sleeping chambers. In fact, she and her kind construct the most complex above ground houses built by any mammal in the world except for humans. So as far as I'm concerned, wood rats are another world-class species. She's bringing these leaves into her leaching room to let the phenolic compounds outgas before she eats them. And that's okay, because as we can see here, she already has some live oak leaves stashed away for a midday snack. She spends most of her nights up in tree canopies and rests and sleeps during the day. So wood rats are a keystone species, one without which ecosystems would be extremely different or even collapse, because their large complex houses provide shelter for a vast array of uninvited guests who greatly increase the abundance of and variety of animals in ecosystems, from millipedes and salamanders to brush rabbits and rattlesnakes. And they have their own fun and fascinating chapter in my book, so there's much more to learn about them. And of course, both ground squirrels and western gray squirrels both eat and plant acorns, but only close to home. That's why they aren't some of the main planters of oaks in California. This is a squirrel that lives in my yard. So if this squirrel got eaten by a predator, whoops, what I was going to say is, and who else besides this squirrel gets nourished by the acorns that he eats? Well, anyone who eats him. And who might that be? Well, many raptors, including red-tailed hawks and golden eagles, who also eat ground squirrels. In fact, here's a golden eagle about to catch a ground squirrel, and here's a golden eagle carrying a ground squirrel. You can see it right here. And mammals, of course, many mammals, of course, eat squirrels, including coyotes and bobcats and gray foxes and rattlesnakes. And badgers eat ground squirrels. I don't know if they eat gray squirrels. And they actually get recruited by coyotes for hunting partnerships. These two are sitting here studying a ground squirrel colony. And Anne McGlinty painted this image from an actual photograph, that looked exactly like this. Deer also eat and depend heavily on acorns, especially right now. This is the time of year when acorns are really important to them. And the calories and the acorns that they eat could end up providing calories for mountain lions, for instance, or in the case of fawns, for bears and coyotes and golden eagles and vultures. Black bears eat, like this cub, eat one acorn at a time, and I've been told that you can see the acorn shells dribbling out the sides of their mouth. I don't know how this cub could be comfortable resting like this after gorging herself on acorns. I sure couldn't do that. So what animals besides mammals eat acorns? Well, there are birds like acorn woodpeckers and scrub jays that I mentioned. Here, a scrub jay is tearing a leaf off a valley oak acorn. And there are also Steller's jays, Lewis's woodpeckers, California quail, northern flickers, crows, ravens, oak titmice, and even ducks like mallards and this wood duck. So, oh, can you hold on a minute? I think I left my, I left something on.
Doesn't look like an acorn.
That,
Yeah.
oh, the tap's going, right?
No, I didn't. It's just that my water heater's making some weird noises. So these ducks have co-evolved with oaks in a really big way. Their bill shape has evolved not for tugging acorns like the scrub jay's bill or tearing them open, but for scooping them up out of the water. And they can, and their esophaguses are able to hold up to 30 acorns, at where they'll go forage for acorns under oak trees, and then they fly off to a safe place with 20 or 30 acorns stuffed into their crops. They swallow the acorns whole, and then the acorns end up getting ground up by pebbles in their gizzards. So acorns constitute about up to 75% of a wood duck's diet in the fall right now. And of course, the acorns consumed by this wood duck will end up nourishing any predator that might catch him, such as a great horned owl, and probably a peregrine falcon, or a raccoon, or a gray fox, or even a mink. I'd heard that we have minks around here, and I didn't believe it until during these last 2 summers, I've seen 4 mink, or 1 mink 4 times, I'm not sure. They were all in the same place. And I even have a short video of a mink that I managed to photograph as it was swimming. It's only short, very short, 5 seconds, but we can look at that afterwards if we have time. So of course, whoever eats one of these mink will also be indirectly eating acorns if the mink ate a wood duck that had been eating acorns. So I used to think that acorns were probably the primary reason that oak woodlands are so diverse and wildlife rich. But there's another little known and probably even more important reason, and that has to do with the enormous leafy canopies of oaks. These not only provide hiding, nesting, perching, and foraging sites to countless animals, from spiders and lizards to hawks and bears, they also provide food for thousands or tens of thousands of caterpillars, which are the larvae of moths and butterflies. 897 caterpillar species are known to feed on North American oaks, and there is no other tree that comes even close to being able to host that many caterpillars. And the vast majority of those caterpillars are moths. So this caterpillar, which can feed only on oak leaves, will start out as a tiny, tiny egg on an oak leaf. And then the egg will hatch and a tiny, tiny caterpillar will come out, maybe about a few millimeters long. And it'll start to eat those oak leaves. And in the process of voraciously eating leaves, Over the course of a few weeks, it will eat up to 27,000 times its body mass in leaves. It will shed its skin a few times. It will then spin a cocoon, dissolve into liquid inside that cocoon, and reemerge as this California sister butterfly. Entomologist and wildlife ecologist Doug Tallamy, who is the author of this amazing book, just published this year, The Nature of Oaks, the Rich Ecology of Our Most Essential Native Trees, calls caterpillars repurposed leaves that walk and poop. Well, actually, he didn't put the poop part in, that's me. I added that because I've been rained on with caterpillar poop when I've been out camping in April under oak trees. So most of the thousands of caterpillars that eat oak leaves are eaten in turn by other animals like wasps and lizards and squirrels, but mainly by songbirds like this robin or other kinds of birds. Caterpillars are so rich in protein, fats, and carotenoids that they are the primary and essential food for most terrestrial birds, baby birds, including baby songbirds. So this robin is carrying food for her babies, just as her parents did for her. But by the time the babies of this robin and her mate are close to fledging, the parents may need to bring in 800 caterpillars a day to feed their babies. And if those caterpillars aren't nearby, close at hand, in trees that are where it's quick for the robins to go and find them and bring them back to their babies, the babies will starve to death. And that's what's happening in a lot of cities where there aren't native plants around. So these small, smooth caterpillars are the favorites of baby birds. They're called inchworms, though they're not actually worms. And in fact, in my local California Native Plant Society chapter, we say caterpillars turn into birds. Acorn woodpeckers even feed caterpillars to their babies, as we see here. And so without caterpillars, I wouldn't have had those acorn woodpeckers to keep me from being too lonely and depressed, and we wouldn't hear much birdsong every spring. This is the song of the black-headed, I'm going to play you the song, the black-headed grosbeak, which is the bird on the lower left. The one on the upper left is a western bluebird, and the other one is a lazuli bunting. So here is the song of the black-headed grosbeak. And while we're listening to it, I just want to emphasize what I said earlier about insects evolving resistance to the toxins in oaks. Most caterpillars can't eat anything but native plants or their close relatives. And that's because they have co-evolved with native plants over millennia and to have developed resistance to the toxins in them. So if you plant non-native plants, you won't find very many caterpillars on them at all, if any, and you won't be supporting butterflies and moths or birds or anyone up the food chain who depends on them. So please plant for caterpillars. And if you plant nothing else, plant an oak. In 87% of the counties in the United States, oaks support more caterpillars than any other type of plant. And the counties that aren't in that figure are mostly deserts and places where oaks don't live. And guess what? Contrary to what everyone, including entomologists, insect scientists, have long thought, birds even find caterpillars to eat in winter. We never see them because they're pretending to be, guess what? Twigs. This is a caterpillar. This is a caterpillar. This right here is a caterpillar. This is a caterpillar. These caterpillars are suspended from their own silk, but they're looking very much like twigs. And these caterpillars are pretending to be lichens. This is a caterpillar, and this is a caterpillar. And this one is pretending to be bark. So I just learned recently about these overwintering caterpillars that turn out to be essential food for birds in winter. In winter, we have, around here, we have a lot of berries like toyon berries and manzanita berries that are left on manzanitas for much of the winter, and poison oak berries. Poison oak berries, by the way, are important food for at least 52 species of birds. So don't take out your poison oak if you don't have to. But those aren't enough. Berries and sugar, they need protein and fats. And so apparently there are a lot of caterpillars around here hiding from us, looking like twigs and bark, and I want to start looking for them. And these close focus binoculars are, without a shadow of a doubt, the best tool for looking. They're also great for looking for tiny, tiny monarch caterpillars or any tiny caterpillars on anything. And they allow you to see insects and flowers and spider webs and lizards and tarantula burrows in incredible glorified magnification without having to get down on your knees or scaring anybody like a lizard or a dragonfly away if you got too close. So you can read or purchase, read about or purchase these on my website, where you can also find my book and my oak identification guides. And both the book and the oak identification guide are now at the Healdsburg Museum, and so you should buy them there if you're in the area. These guides show classic acorns and leaves. These are the acorns and these are the leaves. And then in this lower line, they show galls, that can help you identify oak species. And if you don't know what galls are, there is a chapter on them in my book. There are 4 more oak species on the other side of this guide, which is laminated, and it's about 8.5 by 11. So in closing, I would like to recommend that everyone plant acorns. This is the ideal time to do it, unless we have a long dry spell ahead. So you might watch the weather. And if you care about helping plummeting insect populations and everyone who depends on them, this is really the best thing that you can do and it will help. It'll help everybody, including animals like this screech owl who eats small rodents that eat acorns. And this is the frontispiece of my book, painted by Anne McGlinty, and I think it's just about my favorite painting in the book. So let's have questions now, and don't forget to go to the Healdsburg Museum to see the exhibit that's coming up, if it's not already up. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can take, well, maybe, who's asking the questions? Lauren or Holly?
Well, there are some questions in the chat. Can you see the chat questions, or should I read?
No, read them to me.
Okay, let's see. Let's see. Oh, compliments about your book. And a couple of people saying, hey, Kate, would love a volume 2.
I had made modifications to the existing edition, which is, as I said, now in its 7th printing. So I've updated and added new cool stuff as I've gone, as these different printings have been done. But
yeah, mostly they're compliments about your book and encouragement for you to do a volume 2. And several people have said they bought them as gifts. But then there's a question, what insect species are commonly seen on oaks in the winter?
well, these caterpillars that I mentioned are mostly in the they're mostly these ones called inchworm. They're in the Geometridae family. And if you think about that, inch and Geometridae, so that that's why, I don't know which came first, but it's easy to remember that inchworms are geometers. Otherwise, not a lot. There are spiders. What I didn't talk about is that there are crevices in bark, in oak bark, especially in mature trees with really, chunky looking bark and deep crevices, and various pupae and spiders can be found in the bark, but I keep looking and I don't find very many. And now I'm thinking I just don't know what I'm looking for, because maybe they're disguised as bark or twigs. I don't know. Is there any? I don't know if someone else can answer that question better. But so all Lepidoptera species overwinter either as chrysalises or pupae. Lepidopterae mean butterflies and moths, and so all of those overwinter either as chrysalises or larvae or adults. There are a few adults. There's a few butterflies that overwinter as adults, such as mourning cloaks, and I think a California tortoiseshell, and maybe a painted lady. And I'm not sure where you look for them. They're in hibernacula somewhere. And one cool fact is that they secrete glycerin to act as an antifreeze to keep them from freezing during really cold weather.
Wow, cool. There's another question. Are there any oak planting projects coming for somebody who'd like to help get involved?
Not that I know of, but you might talk to Lindsay Daly of the Oak Granary and see if she has any coming up. But it's not hard to plant acorns. And another thing besides planting acorns that I should have mentioned is protecting oak seedlings that have come up on their own. Mm-hmm. with a wire cage made out of hardware cloth, and you can pound in, a half section of rebar and wire it to that, or maybe 2 of those, or you can put in 3 T-posts in a triangle and stretch chicken wire around it, and that will protect them from deer. If you're planting acorns, you can one really easy way to do it is find a shrub that lets some light through, or a pile of branches, or even create your own pile of branches, and bury an acorn under a 1/2 inch or 1 inch of soil, and then it'll be hopefully protected from deer by that as it matures. And if it's near where you live and it's easy, its first summer, you could give it 1 gallon or 2 of water per month, and maybe do that again in the following summer. If you don't have any of those natural or homemade shelters to protect them. You can put a cage around them of hardware cloth. Yeah, hardware cloth is good. If you want to be, the more time consuming way to do it is to dig down about 6 inches and build a little wire cage that has a bottom on it so the gophers can't get in, and then fill it back in with dirt, and again, bury your acorn under about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of soil, and then put a taller cage around that. Or you could wait till it comes up, and you could put 2 or 3 acorns in there in case some of them don't germinate. And the way to tell if acorns are viable is to put them in a tub of water for about a day or two, and the ones that float aren't viable.
Okay. Another question. What is the current status of sudden oak death syndrome? How threatened are coastal Northern California oak communities?
They're quite threatened. I don't live with them, and I'm not very in touch. But as far as I know, I don't know what has happened as far as, I think one of the strategies is to find the oaks that appear to have resistance to sudden oak death, because some do. That's one strategy, and plant more of those. Another is there's a website called Sudden Oak Life, and you can go there and see what, I can't remember his name, is doing. He thinks that the Phytophthora ramorum, the fungal-like organism that causes sudden oak death, is mostly getting in through the bark, and he is adding minerals to the soil and actually dusting trees with minerals to strengthen them. And you can see photographs online of trees who he has done that with. You can see before and after photos of really sparse looking canopies and really thriving looking canopies 4 years later or something like that.
Oh,
But as far as any statistics, I don't know.
okay. Here's a question from, let's see. Heather asks, I have property in San Luis Obispo County, which is primarily oak woodland with lots of downed trees. What are the benefits of leaving the downed tree trunks as opposed to removing them?
You can do nothing better than leaving them if you're not too worried about the fire risk. They provide a lot of habitat for instance, woodpeckers and beetles that then, provide food for other species. And they also, over time, return their nutrients to their plant neighbors. The mycelium carries the released carbon through the underground fungal network to give, and not just carbon, other nutrients at all, as the legacy of the dead tree to her neighbors. So if you can leave them, if you're not worried about fire, by all means do.
Cool. Let's see. Where is the oldest valley oak you know of?
The oldest, I know the tallest. Well, the trouble with valley, you have to do core samples on them to know how old they are. The one that I mentioned is 800 years old, and it's on Reynolds Highway north of Willits, I believe. I actually haven't seen it, I've just heard about it. So I don't even know if it's exactly on Reynolds Highway or even how visible it is from the road. It might be on private property. If you want to email me at, you can find my email address at my website under contacts. You can, I can try to get you in touch with the person who knows if you're interested in going to see it.
Okay. Let's see.
I'd be interested if anyone here knows about any older ones.
And and a question from a 6-year-old. Why are oaks seeds, acorns, so big?
Well, why is always a tricky question when you're talking about nature. And actually, one idea is that, so they're not all big. Some are really tiny. Our biggest acorns here are Valley Oak acorns. They're the ones that are V-shaped. And when oaks germinate, they send down something called a taproot that goes deep, deep, deep into the soil. And the bigger the acorn, the more energy, the more sugar, the more food there is for that taproot going deep down into the soil. So that's an advantage for an acorn, for an oak tree to have a big acorn. But then why have some oak trees evolved to have such little, really little acorns? And that might be because they're easier for birds to carry, and birds disperse acorns. So they help plant them. So that tree that has tiny acorns will be able to have babies in a lot of other places. So that's what I can think of now to say.
Okay. Well, one last question and then on to Sherrie. One person wrote, a big oak on our property fell over the day after the big storm on Sunday. We'd had it checked by an arborist in June who said it was in good shape. Just wondering if there was anything that we missed.
Well, there's probably nothing you could have done about it. I'm assuming it had heart rot and you can't necessarily see that. The outside of the trunk can look intact, mostly intact, but it can be all mushy inside. I would want to ask if it fell over, if the roots came up, if it fell over, if it broke, or if it just fell over. So if it fell over as opposed to breaking, then I would guess there was maybe it would tended to have a lean to it, and maybe the roots had rotted. I imagine there are a lot of causes of root rot. One thing I just learned is that, you know, those 17-year and 13-year cicadas, well, we don't have 13-year cicadas, but I mean, 17-year cicadas. And here, I don't think we even have cyclical cicadas here. We have cicadas we have a lot of cicadas, and their larvae feed on the leaves on the roots of oaks. Those are their favorite food. And sometimes they're down there for many, many, many years. So feeding away on the roots of oaks. So I don't know how much impact they have. Then there's also the drought. A lot of trees are struggling, a lot of oaks are struggling right now because of the drought. A lot are losing branches and a lot are falling over and breaking. So I think I think that's probably a big factor too. And I don't think there's anything you could have done about it.
Thank you. So those are all the questions that are in the chat.
Okay. And now it's time for Sherrie.
Okay.
So I'll stop sharing my screen, and if we want to look at any of those videos afterwards, I have a few videos and a few more tidbits if anybody wants to stay after Sherrie.
Great, thank you. Okay. So now, Sherrie, you're the co-host. We can get you to unmute. And you can share your screen.
I have my tech assistant here
Okay,
helping me.
cool.
Sorry.
While we're doing that, I can introduce you. Or maybe it's too distracting because we'll watch your screen.
I think we're almost there.
Okay. I love the title.
Okay.
Okay. So I'd like to introduce Sherrie Smith-Ferri. Sherrie is the guest curator of our Healdsburg Museum exhibit, From Digger Bend to River Rock, Dry Creek Rancheria People and History, which is on display through May 2022. A Dry Creek Pomo tribal member herself, Dr. Smith-Ferri has worked in the museum field for more than 2 decades. She's a well-known scholar in the field of California Indian history and culture in general, and Pomo culture and basketry in particular. Sherrie's been a consultant or curator for numerous exhibits, working with the National Museum of the American Indian, the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, the California State Indian Museum, and the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Anthropology. She recently retired after 2 decades of employment at the Grace Hudson Museum and Sun House in Ukiah as both curator and executive director. And it's been a real pleasure to work with her on this exhibit. Take it away, Sherrie.
Okay, thank you. So telling good nuts from bad nuts, which is a life skill that we should all have. So really, you know, the acorns from oak trees become very important to Native people living in this area. And just wanted to start out with a couple of quotes. One is by S.E. Parrish, who was Kashaya Pomo, and who talks about oak trees being like a relative or good friend. That tree is beautiful because it gives us good food. I'm always happy when it's acorn picking time. Long ago, it was our most common food. We ate it every day. We stored up as much as we could. And another Pomo woman, Elsie Allen, who lived up here in Ukiah, said once that Pomo Indians and the acorn trees are just the same thing. We wouldn't be the same Indians if there wasn't acorns. And really the genesis of this talk was my discussion with teachers over the years who would like to have their kids do something sort of Native related in the fall. And a lot of times they were interested in having the kids process acorn, and found that it usually didn't go well. And I would ask them, so what did you do? And they would be like, well, we just had the kids go out and pick up acorns, you know, and it was like, oh, stop right there. You know, that's where some of the problems are coming from. So in this short talk, I want to talk a little bit about what to collect, when to collect it, how to collect it, how to improve your acorns, and how to preserve your acorns. What to collect. And this is just taken in our yard yesterday when I was putting this together. And so what you'll find out is a lot of acorns are going to fall on the ground, and they're not going to have their caps. They're going to leave them behind on the trees. So this comes to what to collect, or all acorns are not created equal. They're, in terms of human consumption, there's definitely favorite acorns and not favorite acorns. And so, you know, all acorns in general can be made edible. We are fortunate right here in Sonoma County, Mendocino County area to live with numerous acorn species, oak species with numerous kinds of acorns. And, you know, after thousands of years of experimentation, people have decided that one of the favorite kinds of acorns to eat are black oak acorns. And so that's, in our family, that was one of the things we always set out to collect. And so you need to learn sort of the markers of those trees and those acorns to pick them up, because they'll often be mixed with other oak trees. And on the ground, when they fall, you're going to have to distinguish among them. So first you have to find them, and you find the trees, and then you have to find the acorns. So in black oak acorns, in black oak trees, you're going to be looking often at the leaves. So they have, you know, sort of leaves with these deep lobes, they're indents, that have sharp points on the ends of those, and they're deciduous. So their leaves are going to turn yellow and fall off. And so if you look out on the hills now, you can still see that, in Mendocino County anyway, where I live, still see them sort of golden on the hills. And you're looking for acorns, they have big sort of shingled or scaly caps that come down and cover a lot of the nut. And this is used to make this sort of dense, nutty bread from black acorn flour, because it's rich in fats and oils, richer than a lot of other acorns. And so this is, again, just from our yard. This is fresh black oak leaves and black oak acorns. Tan oak is the other sort of favored, in terms of food, favored acorn. And again, these are pretty distinctive in terms of what their acorns look like and what their leaves look like. So tan oak acorns, they have these kind of stickery, prickly covered caps. And often the nuts themselves are usually all covered with kind of this fuzz, this white fuzz. And the acorns themselves are going to turn sort of much lighter in color, golden brown or tan, and they're evergreen. So their leaves are going to remain on the tree all year, and they have this kind of fishback pattern on them. And tan oak acorns are used only to make mush. They don't contain enough oil to make bread. So kind of a different, and these are some of the tan oak acorns, and you can see that sort of real prickly little cap. And I should say here, and Kate might want to chime in, tan oaks are not really sort of scientifically oaks. They're in the chestnut family. Is that right, Kate? So
their genus is Notholithocarpus, and they might be in the chestnut family.
So they kind of look, if you know what chestnuts look like on the outside, that sort of spiny shell they have, you can see that in those caps. And just for comparison, live oak acorns, and somehow my it doesn't want to go forward. So I'm going to get my tech. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Let's try that. Live oak acorns live oaks have beautiful acorns. I think one of the things that happen when you send kids out is they're looking for pretty acorns, and usually live oaks are very pretty acorns. They have these kind of nice little sort of beanie hats, these really cute little caps, very kind of smooth shells. They really can be quite big sometimes in conical shape. And again, their leaves are evergreen, but they're sort of very small and pointy, kind of like holly leaves. And we just didn't eat live oak acorns because you could, but there's better alternatives. But certainly use the wood and branches a lot for various kinds of things. So again, some of the live oak leaves and acorns. And so one of the things you have to know first is what to look for and get the right kind of acorns. The next thing you have to know is when to collect the acorns. So there's something that we always call first drop or second drop. I don't know the scientific terms for it, but there's a pattern often with acorns and oaks that you have a number of acorns that are going to fall on the ground first. Most of those actually aren't very viable, don't have a lot of good nuts in terms of eating among them. So we were always told you let first drop go, and you note when it happens, but leave it on the ground. And so some of that is to feed the other animals that all are dependent on acorn as well. And some of it is knowing that second drop will come along. And so that's the next time the acorns are going to fall in large quantities. And often that's after, that's in the process of a storm. So after a wind comes through, after the rains, the first storm will come through in the season, and a lot of times that will kind of help the acorns release and fall on the ground. But a lot of times you would send kids, young boys and men up the tree to actually kind of knock on the branches and help those acorns fall too. And that's the second drop is where you get most of your good acorns falling. And I just wanted to show a picture. Again, this is yesterday of just a live oak acorn that is starting to germinate, just for people to see that process happening. You can see in there that taproot that Kate is talking about going down into the ground. And most acorns aren't going to germinate. They're going to get eaten by all the different animals that are out there. But you do get some that are going to germinate, and that's woodrat, our friend, who is nutty for acorns. And the next thing you have to know is how to collect. There are only perfect acorns. And this is my grandma, Lucy Smith, and that is me a long time ago. And I loved my grandma, and she's the one that taught me about acorns. And I would go, and she was the one that knew where all the trees were. So we'd always go out to the same place year after year. We had specific kind of groves, if you will, that we knew about. And what you find is that acorns tend to the trees that produce big acorns and are good producers. That'll be true, kind of year after year. They just are better trees than other trees. And so you kind of spend some time finding out where the good trees are. And the different acorn species have better years than others. There is this kind of consistent difference in quality with the trees. And so we go out and we wait for second drop, and I'd start collecting. And I would usually, this is when I'm pretty small, and I would usually sort of have my pile and bring it over to my grandma, and I would be so proud and give it to her, and she would always say, "Oh, thank you, honey," and what good work. But meanwhile, she'd be throwing away most of my acorns, and which was, and she would tell me, she would show them to me, and she would tell me why she was throwing them away, and that's how you learn. So she was throwing away any acorns that I was collecting that looked like this. So any acorns that had sort of little bumps or warts on them, had circles on them or spots, had holes in them, you know, anything, again, she would only save the perfect acorns. Anything that had any sort of blemish, it was gone. And so you had to learn to be very picky about your acorns. And that really comes from what we're going to call the problem of the acorn worms. And that's what we used to call them when I was growing up. And if you remember Kate talking about this little guy, this insect, which is an acorn weevil. Pretty cute, really. But what happens with this guy is it is going to fly up in the spring, in early summer, into an oak tree, and it's going to mate there. And that long sort of curling snout it has, it's going to use that to drill into the soft, you know, acorn that's still forming. They're going to drill a hole through the shell of the acorn and lay eggs in there. And those eggs are going to hatch into these little sort of, if you can see in that white circle, this sort of grubby looking thing, what we used to call worms, that sort of white semicircle there. And it's, if you think of the book James and the Giant Peach, that's kind of the story of the acorn worm. These sort of baby, what are beginning to come, you know, the acorn weevils, they're hatched in there. They're surrounded by their favorite food. All they have to do is eat, and that's what they do. Eat voraciously most of the year and get bigger and bigger until something happens in their world. And there's this tremendous sort of thump that they're going to experience. And it happens when the acorn falls to the ground, and it signals that little acorn worm, that baby weevil, that it's time to do the next part of its life cycle. So it has to chew its way out through the shell of the acorn. It's time for it to do that. And it's fascinating to watch if you ever have a chance and you collect acorns and you leave them for a while, you will almost certainly, even if you collect perfect acorns, you're probably going to miss one or two of these little guys inside. And you will find these little sort of, after a few days, you'll find these little white things sort of trying to squirm along whatever it is. If you've got newspaper or sheets under your acorns, you'll find them there, and they're just looking, they've chewed their way out. And it's fascinating to watch them sort of squeeze themselves through these holes that they've chewed. And then they're looking for the ground, because what they're programmed to do is to crawl out, go into the ground, burrow down, and then it's going to pupate. It's going to go through several different insect larval stages, and it's going to emerge after quite a while from the ground as one of these weevils. And it's going to fly up into the tree and start that process all over again. And so essentially, you have this cycle. And as that cycle goes on, you're going to find that more and more of the acorns in that tree become infested. And so Native people had to find a way to break that cycle, because if you eat an acorn that has one of those holes in it, so in other words, if you want to eat an acorn that has had one of the weevils living inside of it, the weevil worms, this is again, photo from yesterday. I took an acorn right from my yard with a hole, smashed it open, and that's what it looks like, which is not very appetizing. And mostly what you're looking at there is acorn poop, what they call, acorn weevil poop. So insect poop, they call it frass often. But really what you want to eat when you're eating your acorns are nuts like that, which have a lot of good food. So you do not want to pick up any acorns, and certainly put a lot of effort into storing and processing them, any acorns that have any chance of being infested by those weevils. So one of the best ways of breaking that cycle is actually through fire. And so, controlled burns, so sort of regular kind of low intensity burns, setting fires that are deliberate, was a sort of major tool in Native people's environmental management toolbox. And they were particularly effective when it came to sort of ensuring the health of oak trees and ensuring the health of acorn crops. So what happens when you burn under the oaks? You consume these piles of old leaves and dead branches and acorn shells and bark and all this debris that has accumulated under the oaks. And the heat from the fire, which is not, really hot enough. If it's a mature tree, it's not hot enough to hurt the tree itself. But what it will do is kill the weevils that are, sort of pupating under there in the earth. And you can also, depending on when you're setting the fire, you can kill the newly hatched weevils that are living, right there in the tree debris. Or you can burn up the fallen acorns with the grubs that are still living inside of them. So basically, regular burning like that will help increase your acorn crop in terms of the good acorns and improve your oak's health. And if fire acts, when you do that, fire is going to act like a fertilizer for that tree. So it is the ashes of all of that debris really recycle the nutrients that were found in all that debris and put it back into the soil for the plants to feed from. And it's just, it's especially good to burn it now. So you have the rains that will come along and help, that water will help draw those nutrients down into the soil. If you burn underneath the oaks, it really helps to clear the ground out underneath them. And so it's really easy then to harvest your acorns because you have this kind of clear soil that they're falling from, and they're falling onto, that you're picking up from. And really, it's protecting those oaks from destructive wildfires. So you're reducing the amount of burnable fuel that is under the trees. And so, you're helping to clear the land so you don't have large destructive fires in the future. So in terms of then you have your good acorns, you have your perfect acorns from the right species, you've gotten them at the right time. What next? So the big thing is you have to know how to preserve them and store them. And, actually, Kate talked a lot about the acorn woodpecker. The acorn woodpecker knows this problem as well. It needs to store its acorns So it can come back and live on them, during the hard times when it needs food in the winter. So, we're doing the same thing and probably learned a lot of this from acorn woodpecker. You're trying to protect your acorns. And I will say, acorns are wonderful because they're almost like perfectly packaged by nature. So you have this really, and I should say nutritionally, acorns are a fabulous food. They're rich in good fat. They have protein, they have carbohydrates, they have minerals. You can live a long time and be happy just on acorns. And that's what people did a lot during the winter. When it's wet and raining, like it's going to be soon, you were living off your stored foods. And so, but you had to make sure, and I would say as a, you have that nut that's surrounded by this hard shell, which is protecting it. So, the oak is helping you to preserve your acorns by packaging it like that for you, but you still have a few things that you have to protect against. So you have to protect against mold and moisture. That's probably one of your, in terms of spoiling your acorns, that's one of the big ways to have it spoil. Theft. So you're not talking so much about theft by people here. You're talking theft by all the other beings that like to eat those acorns and that are happy to help you consume them if you give them a chance. So, and I should say that humans, so one of the things we always learn too, that humans will steal acorns as well. So one of the things that we were always told is if it's a hard year, and you need acorns, one of the ways you can get them is to go find wood rats nests who have, as Kate was talking about, have very graciously sort of put them all in a little special room for you to raid. So you can harvest their work, or you can harvest the work of the acorn woodpeckers and find a granary tree where they are putting those acorns in, and you can take that down and harvest those too. So it's not a one-way street here, it's a two-way street often. So you want to sort of make sure that you're putting them in a place where they'll be safe from rats, from all these other things, beings that want to bears and all these other things would like your acorns, and insect infestation. So this is kind of the first stage of that process when you're preserving your acorns. This is a photograph that was taken at Yoqueo Rancheria up here in Mendocino County in 1893. And it's this series of great photographs because, through these letters that accompany this, you know exactly when it's taken. It's taken in October. And what you can see are all the people at the rancheria, and they have harvested their acorns and they're processing their acorns. And you can see acorns everywhere. And one of the things I want you to see here is all of these kind of maybe rocks or something looking like on the ground. Those are all acorns spread out to dry. And right here on top of this little lean-to, these are all acorns spread out to dry. So that's the first part. Once you picked up your acorns, to successfully preserve them, you have to spread them out to dry and let them either be in the sun or in our case, often I'll put them out on my porch in a blanket or a sheet underneath, and bring them in at night where it's warm, and just do that for a while and several days until they really have had a chance to dry out. So you're getting rid of some of the moisture in the beginning. And then in old days, you would put them in various sorts of granaries, was what they're called. So essentially some sort of enclosure that would protect them. And this is one sort of granary is often made with trees, a tree stump. And so this is Essie Parrish, and she's used tree stumped and lined it with various kinds of plants. And one of the kinds of plants, you can't really see it there, is the leaves from bay leaves from the bay tree or the pepperwood tree or the California bay laurel. People have different names for it, which are essentially insecticides, I guess you'd say, or insect repellents. This is very similar to the kind of bay leaves that you use when you cook with, and you know that smell they have those volatile oils. And one of the things in Kate's book that's really fun to find out about is that wood rats do the same thing. They will haul in bay leaves to put with their little caches to help them keep out the insects. So there you go. So, you know, you're putting things in the granary to help you sort of repel insects, to protect it from being easily, you know, on the top of those stumps, you know, you sort of cover it with a lot of branches, and then you have vegetation on top to kind of provide some sort of ability to shed water. This is another kind of granary, so made with a basket, essentially. It's put up on those poles so that it's harder for animals to get to. It's got you can see the space, the light coming through it, so it's got spaces so the air can circulate, and it's got the sort of dome on the top, or the little conical roof on it is to shed the water. So you're trying to sort of guard against molds and moisture, guard against theft, and guard against sort of insect infestation. So, different kinds of solutions to all those problems. And this is pretty much what we do today. That's in my garage. You can shut the door, keep all the animals out. You store it in boxes. It's dry inside, and you store it in boxes, cardboard boxes, or sometimes people do it in burlap bags, something that will let air circulate. And if any of you haven't ever had a chance to try Acorn, I am going to encourage you to do that. I think later on in programs related to the exhibit, we're going to have a native foods day where you can see that whole process from beginning to end, and how it, you use baskets along the way that are made specifically for that purpose to help you process. But my time is over. And so I just was going to see if there were any questions, comments that people had.
Well, I think everybody but me is muted. We can let people speak if they want. I'm checking in the chat to see if there are any questions for you, Sherrie. No, just interested comments. No questions, though.
Okay.
Anything else that you would like to add, or Kate, would you like to add?
Can I make a brief comment?
Well,
Molly?
Sherrie, that's an interesting idea about wood rats using bay leaves to protect their food stores. What I know about is that they use them to reduce the flea population in their bedrooms because they, well, in laboratory experiments, it's shown that they kill something like 70% of flea larvae But I wouldn't be, they're so smart, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they put them in their pantries. I bet they do. And for everybody's information, it's kind of fun. They just nibble the edges of the bay leaves, and they don't eat bay leaves, so they just nibble the edges to release the volatile oils, and then they replace them every 3 days. Go out, take them away, and bring in new ones.
A few more comments in the chat that are, thank you for both Sherrie and Kate for the wonderful talks.
And I was going to say, Kate, if you want to show the little videos you had for anybody that wants to stay around.
Okay. I have a whole lot of videos, and I didn't think I'd have much time, so I just picked a few that were really, really short. Oh, but also I want to say that I was looking for one about badgers and coyotes hunting together, and I found, you should go online and look for that. I found an absolutely amazing video of the actual process of them both hunting together, not just kind of traveling together, which is what I had seen before. So I'll share screen.
Okay.
And I'll have to go that way down to the end. Whoops, so here I am at the end already. Okay, so this is a pool in the Russian River. And if you look at my pointer, look very closely right in here. And you're going to see a mink swimming and then climbing up on this rock in here. I'll play it again.
Cool.
So that's all I have in the mink department. And this is a dipper nest, an American dipper. And here's a baby begging for food. And I visited this nest many times 2 summers ago, and then they nested in a different place last summer. And I have lots of videos and photographs. So here is a feeding. They happen so fast, it's frustrating. You want to see more, but they just deliver food and usually take off immediately. So that roaring sound isn't a freeway, that's the water. They usually build their nests over roaring water or running water. And it's roaring at the beginning of the season, but usually not so much at the end. And they're called dippers for that little bounce up and down that you saw the adult bird do. I'll play it again. Whoops. And so there's tons of fascinating stuff to tell about these birds. And they have, if you've ever watched them, when they blink their eyes, you see a white flash. And that's because they have tiny little white feathers on their eyelids. And it might be in order to be a way of communicating over roaring water when they can't be heard very well. No one knows for sure. Okay, and so here is a northern flicker. It's a male regurgitating food into his baby's mouths. I'll just play that one again. And then this next one is one of those babies just sticking, I guess this is a he, sticking his head out to get to know this big wide world, and listening to, you can hear a parent making a little call in the background. And you can tell this is a hot day because his mouth is open. That's what they do when they're hot. Whoops. We're going to play that one again. And flickers, as you probably know, are woodpeckers, and they have the longest tongues in woodpeckerdom. They can stick out beyond their bills 2 inches, but the total tongue structure is about 5 inches long, and there's no storage space for it, except that what it does is it goes through the back to the back of the head, and then winds around over the top of the head, and winds around the right eye socket, and anchors down in the right mandible. So those are all the videos I have. If I needed to fill time, I have some other extra tidbit things, but it's probably time to bring this to a close. Sherrie, I loved your talk, and learning more about acorn management and harvesting and curing. I haven't made any acorn products in years, and I'd like to try it again. So I'm going to stop screen sharing now, but I don't see there.
I would say that there's a lot of food out there in the hills.
Yeah.
Something that might come in handy to know about one of these days.
Survival food.
Mm.
Or more.
Or more, yep.
Why don't you tell people about bay nuts?
Oh, well, we'll do that another time. Come to the Native Foods Festival, and we will be able to feed you roasted bay nuts and goodies, and you can experiment.
So when is that? Did that get announced? I was, preoccupied with giving my talk and didn't maybe hear the announcement about everything going on in relation to the exhibit, and even much about the exhibit. If Holly or Lauren or Sherrie could tell us about that.
I can tell, hold on a minute. I will grab my flyer, my exhibit flyer, and tell people the date. I think it's sometime in the spring.
So while, am I on? Yeah. While Sherrie's getting that flyer, I'd just like to say that we also have our events listed online on the Healdsburg Museum website. One of the top links is calendar. And so under the calendar is a digital version of essentially what Sherrie's going to be telling you about. But, oh, yes, thank you, Robin. That's it. So please go there, or if you come in the museum, you can get your own booklet.
And I was going to say the Native Food Festival is Saturday, March 26th from 2 to 4 at the museum. And we'll have peppermint balls, black oak acorn mush, manzanita cider, manzanita flower teas, seaweed, salmon, and probably some other goodies for people to sort of taste and see how we prepare. And then I'd just like to encourage people to come to the next program, which is going to be not very long, in a couple of weeks, in the gallery at the Healdsburg Museum. And it'll be Dry Creek Weaver Clint McKay, who's going to be doing basket making demonstration. And Clint's an enormous font of information. So if you're interested in basket making and wanting to, Pomo basket making, wanting to see somebody doing it and find out more about it, come and talk to Clint.
Okay. Well, thank you both, Kate and Sherrie. And if anybody also wants to come and see the exhibit, it's open at the Healdsburg Museum Wednesday through Sunday from 11 to 4. And admission is free.
Thank you, Holly. And I just want to say, I'm feeling embarrassed about my brain blip about butterflies spinning, caterpillars spinning cocoons. That was, I know that they make chrysalis, as somebody corrected me in the chat. Just forgot about that. And I also want to say, if you'd like to be on a list to receive notices of my walks and talks, you can send me an email, and you could do that through my website.
Thank you. And this presentation has been recorded, and so we will make it available to anybody who wants to hear it, who is here or who wasn't able to make it today.
So if we registered for this talk, we will receive a notice when it's been posted. Is that how that works, or?
We could do that, sure.
Great, that'd be good.
We also plan to put it on our Facebook.
Okay. How long has this exhibit been in the making, Sherrie? Oh, you're muted.
More than a year.
Wow. Well, I hope tons of people come to see it, and I will.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So have a good rest of your day and have a good weekend.
Okay.